"Ma'am, if you can't find your seat, perhaps you shouldn't be flying alone at all." The words sliced through the air before anyone could process them. Then came the sound, a hollow crack, sharp enough to silence the hum of boarding chatter. A white-gloved hand had just met the face of a blind black woman. Guess. The clatter of a dropped coffee cup. Then stillness. Winnie Loveman's head tilted slightly from the impact, her fingers tightening around her cane as she steadied herself. Her sunglasses slipped lower on the bridge of her nose, revealing the faint cloudiness of her eyes, proof, for anyone watching, that her blindness was no act. But that didn't stop the whispers. "She probably walked into her," someone muttered. "People fake disabilities all the time," another added, scrolling their phone to record the aftermath. And just like that, an act of humiliation transformed into a public performance. Flight attendant Rebecca Turner, 32, straightened her Navy uniform, the crisp Atlantic Star badge gleaming under cabin lights. Her voice rose, smooth and professional now, the tone of practiced authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to first class, "I apologize for the disturbance. Some passengers make travel unnecessarily complicated." A ripple of uneasy laughter passed through the aisle. An older businessman murmured, "About time someone enforced the rules." A young couple exchanged glances of discomfort but said nothing. No one wanted to challenge the uniform. The flight had boarded late, the usual scramble of carry-ons and impatience. The 7 a.m. sun angled through the jetway windows, painting the cabin in stripes of orange and gold. Winnie had been among the last to board, a dignified woman of 50 with deep-toned skin and the quiet assurance of someone used to being underestimated. Her cane tapped softly against the aisle floor as she made her careful progress towards seat 2A. Rebecca had already been flustered. The coffee machine had jammed, a child had spilled juice in economy, and the captain had radioed a 10-minute delay. When she saw Winnie hesitating near the galley, she pasted on a brittle smile. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I'd appreciate it, love. I'm looking for 2A. Winnie's voice carried the lilting trace of Jamaica, warm and polite. Rebecca exhaled sharply. "Of course you are." She turned toward the aisle but was too slow to notice the catering cart behind her. When Winnie's cane brushed against it, the tray rattled. A cup toppled, splashing lukewarm coffee onto the floor. "Oh, wonderful," Rebecca snapped. "Now we're making a mess." "I'm sorry I didn't." "Maybe look where you're going next time," Rebecca said, the sarcasm deliberate. Then, realizing what she'd said, she added under her breath, "If you can." Passengers turned. A businessman raised an eyebrow. A teenager smirked. Winnie's cheeks warmed, but she drew a steadying breath. "I can't see, miss. That's why I asked for help." The tension thickened. Rebecca's jaw tightened. She could feel the watching eyes. Purity, that was her refuge. Without thinking, she reached out, seized Winnie's arm, and barked, "I said move to your seat." Winnie jerked back instinctively, and Rebecca's open palm flew. The slap landed with the sound of finality. The world contracted to the space between them. Even the engines outside seemed to pause. Winnie steadied herself, cane clutched against her side like a staff. Her voice, when it came, was almost tender. "That wasn't necessary." Rebecca blinked, stunned by her own hand, then immediately doubled down. "Safety protocols require cooperation. You were obstructing the aisle." A phone camera clicked. Another followed. Dozens of lenses rose, hungry for scandal. "Uncooperative passenger in first class," Rebecca muttered into her radio. "Possible safety risk. Requesting ground security." The captain's calm voice answered in her earpiece. "Copy that, Turner. Proceed per procedure." Rebecca straightened, regaining poise. She addressed the cabin again, louder this time. "Please remain seated. We'll resolve this shortly." The businessman from row 3 folded his newspaper. "These people always think they deserve special treatment," he whispered to his seatmate. A few nodded. Winnie touched her cheek gently. Her fingers trembled, but her posture did not falter. She adjusted the strap of her handbag and spoke softly, almost to herself. "Dignity, girl." From her seat, a college-aged influencer named Kayla Shaw raised her phone for a TikTok livestream. "Guys, you're not gonna believe this. A flight attendant just slapped a blind woman. I'm serious." Her viewer count ticked upward in seconds. Rebecca noticed. Instead of shame, she felt adrenaline. Authority had to be maintained. "Ma'am," she said for the camera's benefit, "if you can't follow instructions, I'll have to remove you. Your condition doesn't exempt you from rules." Winnie lifted her chin. "My condition," she said, "is blindness, not defiance." The line rippled through the cabin like current. A few passengers looked away. A few looked ashamed. Rebecca forced a smile. "Let's not make a scene." "Too late for that," someone whispered. Winnie's hand drifted toward the handle of her cane, where a small smart device was clipped, a safety locator her husband had designed for her years ago. A single press would connect her directly to his phone through the airline's internal network. She brushed the button with her thumb but didn't press it yet. Not yet. At the front of the plane, the intercom buzzed with boarding instructions from the cockpit. In the sealed cabin ahead, Captain Jack Loveman reviewed his checklist, unaware that his wife had just been struck less than 30 feet behind him. He adjusted his headset, voice steady, professionalism ingrained. "Crew, prepare for final boarding completion." Rebecca's radio crackled. "Captain, this passenger is delaying departure. I recommend immediate removal." "Understood," he replied, distracted by takeoff clearance. Down the aisle, the influencer's livestream comments flooded in. "Kick her off already." "No, she's blind." "What are they doing?" "This is gonna go viral." Winnie sat perfectly still. The back of her throat ached with humiliation, but she refused to cry. She had faced stares all her life, the pitying kind, the suspicious kind, the kind that forgot she could feel them. This was just another moment demanding composure. Rebecca folded her arms, satisfied. "Security will be here soon," she said. "Best cooperate." Winnie turned her face toward the window she could not see. "Isn't it funny," she murmured, "how quickly people decide who's the problem?" The atmosphere curdled into discomfort. Every second of silence felt heavier. Rebecca avoided eye contact now. Even she sensed something shifting beyond her control. But procedure was her shield, and she clung to it. 10 minutes, she announced to no one in particular. 10 minutes and this situation will be resolved. Winnie inhaled slowly, her fingertips brushing the small device on her cane once more. Then she pressed it. Far ahead in the cockpit, Jack's console phone vibrated against the throttle base. He frowned, expecting an internal update. When he answered, the voice that filled his headset froze him mid-sentence. "I think you need to come out here." His eyes widened. "Winnie!" The line went dead. Jack's co-pilot looked up, confused. "Sir?" But Jack was already unbuckling his harness. Back in first class, Rebecca leaned closer to her victim, tone dripping condescension. "I hope you understand the consequences of your behavior." Winnie tilted her head toward the sound of her voice, unafraid. "Do you?" Rebecca blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Only that things aren't always what they look like," Winnie replied softly. Something in her composure made even the loudest whisperers fall silent. It wasn't defiance, it was certainty. The kind that precedes revelation. Rebecca straightened, trying to regain dominance. "We'll see about that, ma'am." Winnie's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Yes," she said, "we will." At that moment, Outside the sealed cabin door, a pair of polished shoes stepped into the aisle. No one noticed yet. No one noticed the small nameplate on the cockpit door that read, Capt. Loveman. Welcome to Tales of an Observer, where truth, dignity, and courage meet in the stories we can't afford to forget. Now, before we get deep into the story, I would love to request a little favor from you. Please hit that subscribe button, like this video, and leave a comment telling me the city where you're watching from around the world. And also, please share this story with your loved ones. Now, let's get back into the story and see what unfolds. What began as a moment of boarding gate impatience had become a spark waiting for ignition. Within minutes, the humiliated woman in seat 2A, the furious attendant, and the man stepping out of the cockpit would turn a private injustice into a public reckoning. The silence after the slap fractured like glass. First came the whispers, soft as static, then the collective shuffle of bodies, a chorus of disapproval, confusion, and morbid curiosity. First class, the sanctuary of quiet superiority, now buzzed with the uncomfortable sound of judgment. She must have done something, said the businessman in 2C, his tone confident in ignorance. Blind or not, you don't talk back to crew, another added, half whispering but loud enough to sting. A young woman across the aisle shook her head. That was wrong, she murmured to no one in particular, but her voice trembled, unsure if she was brave or foolish to say it aloud. And there, at the center of it all, Winnie Loveman sat perfectly still. Her posture was regal despite the tremor in her hands. The faint red imprint on her cheek glowed under the sterile cabin lights, but her expression was calm, almost hauntingly so. She reached down and adjusted her cane, aligning it parallel to her knees like a soldier's rifle. The gesture was quiet defiance. Across from her, Rebecca Turner pressed her radio to her mouth. Cockpit, this is cabin, she said crisply. Non-compliant disabled passenger in first class. Possible security concern. The pause. The captain's composed voice came through, slightly distorted by static. Copy that, Turner. Clarify the issue. Is the passenger refusing safety instructions? Rebecca's eyes darted toward Winnie. Cameras were already raised. Affirmative, she said. Passenger refusing crew assistance and creating a disturbance. I recommend ground intervention before departure. Understood, came the reply. She didn't know, not yet, that the voice she'd just spoken to belonged to the husband of the woman she'd slapped. In the cockpit, Captain Jack Loveman adjusted the knobs on his control panel, cross-checking flight data while listening to Rebecca's report through one ear of his headset. He'd dealt with his share of pre-flight incidents. A drunk businessman, a fussy toddler, a panicked first-time flyer. None had ever been serious. He assumed this would be no different. Probably someone struggling with the seatbelt, he muttered to his co-pilot, First Officer Daniel Price, a young man eager to impress. Happens all the time. Daniel chuckled. They said, disabled passenger, right? Maybe she needs assistance. Jack nodded absently, flipping another switch. Tell Rebecca to handle it with care. We're minutes from pushback. He didn't notice the flashing green notification on his console, a brief signal showing a call attempt from his private cockpit line. The one only Winnie had access to. Back in first class, tension thickened like fog. Rebecca's posture straightened, authority pulsing through her every movement. She thrived on control, on the illusion of being the hero in uniform. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, voice clear and rehearsed, please remain calm while we address a small passenger issue. Safety is our top priority here at Atlantic Star Airways. A few passengers nodded, relieved to have a script to follow. They wanted order, not justice. Kayla Shaw, the 20-something influencer, had other plans. She lifted her phone again, switching her TikTok live stream from private to public. Guys, it's happening right now, she whispered into the mic, first-class drama. A flight attendant slapped a blind lady. Yeah, you heard me right, slapped her. Look. Her comments exploded in real time. No way this is real. Post the full video. Tag hashtag flight 229 hashtag blind passenger. The number of viewers shot from 3,000 to 15,000 in under a minute. Rebecca noticed the phone aimed her way and straightened even more, smoothing her uniform jacket. She began speaking louder, projecting authority for her accidental audience. Certain individuals, she said, glancing pointedly toward Winnie, believe the rules don't apply to them. Unfortunately, on this aircraft, safety and compliance are not optional. If passengers refuse to cooperate, it becomes a matter of federal concern. There it was, the sanctimonious tone that made her feel powerful. A woman enforcing order against chaos. Winnie didn't move. Her hands rested quietly on her lap, one folded over the other, the faint shimmer of a gold wedding band catching light. Miss, Rebecca said sharply, you need to apologize to the crew and agree to deplane immediately. A hush fell again. Winnie turned her face toward the voice, her tone gentle but edged with steel. I will not apologize for asking for help. I only wanted to find my seat. Rebecca scoffed. You're obstructing the crew. This flight is delayed because of you. From somewhere in the back, a man muttered, typical. Another voice countered, shaky but firm. She's blind, for God's sake. That was all it took. The cabin divided instantly, half siding with authority, half with decency. The air felt electric. Winnie could feel their eyes on her, 1,000 invisible weights pressing down. She had been seen like this before, pitted, judged, underestimated. But never had she been struck in public. Her heart pounded, but she clung to one word, dignity. When she finally spoke, her voice carried enough quiet power to still even Rebecca. You think blindness makes me a burden, but the only thing blind here is judgment. Rebecca flushed crimson. The phones caught everything. Kayla whispered into her mic, Guys, did you hear that? That line's going viral. In the cockpit, Jack ran through the last safety checks. All right, that's everything but cabin confirmation. Let's get clearance to taxi. The radio buzzed again. Captain, passenger remains non-compliant. Rebecca's voice came through, crisp but tense now. She's refusing to deplane. I'm requesting security assistance. Jack sighed. Understood. Keep calm until ground crew arrives. He still didn't know. Daniel glanced over. Want me to handle it, Captain? Jack shook his head. Let's not overreact. Rebecca can handle passengers. Then he frowned. Something in her phrasing bothered him. Disabled passenger, she'd said. Not elderly, not unruly. Disabled. A faint unease stirred in his chest. Meanwhile, on the cabin floor, the performance intensified. Rebecca retrieved her small intercom mic and addressed the entire aircraft, ensuring her words would be recorded loud and clear. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We're addressing a non-compliant passenger situation in first class. Please remain seated until further notice. The cabin murmured with restless agreement. People hated delays more than injustice. Kayla panned her phone across the aisle, capturing faces, annoyance, disgust, confusion. Then she zoomed in on Winnie, sitting alone, sunglasses slightly askew, posture regal. Look at her, Kayla whispered to her audience. She hasn't moved. She's just I think she's waiting for something. Her chat exploded. She knows something's coming. Who is she? Keep filming. Rebecca turned back to Winnie. Do you have someone we can contact? A family member? A caretaker? Winnie smiled faintly. Oh yes, she said. Someone who takes care of me very well. Well, they'll have to meet you at the gate, because this flight isn't departing with you on board, Rebecca snapped. Winnie's fingers brushed the edge of her cane, the same discreet button she had pressed moments earlier. In the cockpit, Jack's private phone blinked again, the missed call light persistent now. He frowned and tapped the button to retrieve it. Voicemail, from Winnie Loveman. The name froze him. His pulse kicked. "Excuse me a sec," he told Daniel, then hit play. Through the tiny speaker, he heard his wife's voice, trembling but unmistakable. "I think you need to come out here." For a moment, he couldn't move. The world tilted. Then he unbuckled his harness. "You have the controls," he said, his voice low but sharp. "Sir? We're still on the ground." "I said, you have the controls." Jack's boots hit the cockpit floor hard as he stood. His co-pilot stared, bewildered, as the captain opened the sealed door and stepped into the chaos. Back in first class, Rebecca had begun pacing. She relished the sound of her own authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, please understand, safety regulations require that we handle non-compliant passengers before departure. It's nothing personal." A woman in 3D whispered, "How's slapping her part of the regulations?" Rebecca's jaw twitched. "Excuse me?" But before she could respond, the cabin door at the front slid open. Conversation died instantly. The air seemed to thin. A tall figure stepped through, crisp uniform, gold captain stripes gleaming under the lights. Captain Jack Loveman's presence carried the kind of authority that silenced rooms. His eyes swept the aisle once, taking in the scattered expressions, the frozen phones, the flushed attendant, the woman in seat 2A with the bruise on her cheek. "Captain," Rebecca began quickly, relief and defensiveness colliding in her tone. "I'm glad you're here. We have a—" Jack raised a hand, cutting her off. "I know," he said quietly. "I heard everything." The cabin stilled. Rebecca straightened, misinterpreting his calm as support. "Yes, sir." The passenger was uncooperative, possibly faking her disability. "I followed procedure." Jack turned to her slowly, his face unreadable. "What?" "She refused to deplane," Rebecca explained hurriedly. "She's causing a delay." Jack's gaze shifted to Winnie. Her sunglasses had slipped slightly, revealing the faint milky haze of blindness. Her lips curved in a small, knowing smile. "Jack," she said softly. The captain's breath caught. For one suspended heartbeat, the entire cabin existed in silence, the kind of silence that precedes revelation. Rebecca blinked, confused. "Wait, you two know each other?" Jack's voice was quiet, almost dangerous. "That woman," he said, "is my wife." The words landed like thunder. Gasps rippled through the aisle. Phones trembled in shaking hands. Somewhere, Kayla's livestream comment feed exploded into chaos. "What? The blind woman is the pilot's wife? No way this is real. Hashtag Flight 229 Hashtag Loveman." Rebecca's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jack's composure cracked, not with rage, but with something colder, sharper. "You just assaulted a passenger under my command," he said slowly, "and that passenger happens to be my wife." Winnie sat still, her face turned toward his voice. "I told you," she said softly to Rebecca, "things aren't always what they look like." Rebecca stumbled backward, words tumbling incoherently. I didn't know, sir, she. "Stop." Jack's tone sliced through her panic. "You don't talk now. You listen." He turned toward the intercom. "Ground control, this is Captain Loveman. We have an onboard misconduct emergency. I'm holding position until security arrives." The cabin erupted, gasps, murmurs, a wave of shifting judgment. Those who'd sided with Rebecca now stared at her with disgust. The businessman who'd mocked Winnie sank into his seat, hiding behind his newspaper. Kayla's live stream viewer count soared past 40,000. Rebecca's authority crumbled before the eyes of the world. And as she stood trembling, face pale under the sterile lights, Winnie Loveman lifted her chin and whispered the same word that had guided her through every trial of her life. Dignity. The doors stayed sealed. Security was on its way. And the cameras were still rolling. What had begun as a slap would soon become a storm no airline could ignore. The hum of the engines filled the cockpit, steady, rhythmic, ordinary. To anyone else, it was just another pre-flight morning. But inside Captain Jack Loveman's chest, something unfamiliar had begun to stir, unease. He replayed Rebecca Turner's voice in his headset, clipped, defensive, too sure of herself. Non-compliant disabled passenger in first class. Possible fake disability, refusing crew instructions. Jack frowned. Fake disability? The phrase scratched at him like sandpaper. He pressed the comm button. Cabin, this is cockpit. Clarify, Turner. Did you say disabled passenger? The pause. Static. Then Rebecca's voice, taut with irritation. Yes, Captain. Passenger claims to be blind but is obstructing the aisle, possibly exaggerating for attention. Jack leaned back in his chair, brow furrowing. His wife's voice echoed faintly in memory, teasing him one morning months earlier. Jack, if I ever end up on your flight, you better make sure your crew treats me like a queen. He'd laughed then. If you ever end up on my flight, they'll treat you better than the Queen of England. The thought made him shift in his seat now. He didn't like coincidences. Proceed calmly, he said into the mic. Do not escalate. I'll advise ground control to hold until it's resolved. Understood, Rebecca replied, though her tone suggested she had no intention of waiting. Down the aisle, chaos simmered just beneath the surface. The passenger's judgment had split the cabin cleanly in two, the silent and the performative. The silent ones, uneasy, uncertain, watched the blind woman in 2A with pity they didn't know how to express. The performative ones whispered their righteousness, leaning into phones and side comments, cloaked in self-justification. Rebecca Turner stood at the center like a conductor before an orchestra of discomfort. Her polished hair and perfect posture broadcasted authority, but beneath it, her pulse thudded with irritation. She could feel eyes on her, cameras, judgment, expectation, and she had to win the narrative before it turned on her. Ladies and gentlemen, she said loudly, flashing the smile that had earned her commendations from past supervisors. We're experiencing a minor delay due to a passenger misunderstanding. Please remain calm. Winnie sat still. Her cane rested across her lap, her hand lightly gripping its handle. Every word, every vibration in the floor, reached her through subtle senses that had become second nature. She didn't need sight to know what was happening. The tension in the air was palpable, hot with humiliation, electric with voyeurism. When Rebecca's heels clicked closer, Winnie spoke first. Miss Turner, she said quietly, her accent carrying the soft lilt of Jamaica, please don't make this worse. Rebecca's smile tightened. I'm not making anything worse, ma'am. You just need to comply. It's standard safety procedure. I only asked for help, Winnie said. You hit me instead. Rebecca stiffened. Watch your tone. I have witnesses who... You have cameras, Winnie interrupted, her voice steady now. That's all anyone needs. Rebecca blinked, caught off guard by the calm precision of the words. Meanwhile, in row 3, Kayla Shaw's phone shook in her trembling hands. Her TikTok live stream had crossed 25,000 viewers and was climbing fast. Guys, you're watching this in real time, she whispered into her mic, flight attendant versus blind woman. This is insane. The comments streamed so quickly she couldn't keep up. Who's the airline? Tag hashtag blind passenger. That attendant's done for. Keep the camera steady. She didn't know that what she was filming, what thousands were now watching, would ignite headlines by morning. In the cockpit, Jack adjusted his headset, forcing focus. Ground control, this is Flight 229, he said evenly. We have a potential passenger conflict. Holding until further notice. Copy that, 229, came the reply. Need support? Not yet, Jack said, though unease gnawed at him. Cabin crew reports disability misrepresentation. I'm assessing. He cut the transmission, rubbed his temple, and glanced at his co-pilot. Something wrong, Captain? Daniel asked. Maybe. Jack exhaled slowly. Turner said the passenger's blind. That's rare. And she sounded hostile. Daniel shrugged. Could just be another attention seeker. Happens all the time. Jack didn't respond. The word blind echoed too sharply in his head. He stared down at the silver wedding band on his left hand, the same one Winnie had teased him for polishing every morning before a flight. Then his phone buzzed, a vibration he almost didn't notice beneath the drone of the engine. He glanced at the screen. One missed call. Private line, Winnie L. The name hit him like turbulence. He froze. Another buzz followed, a voicemail notification. Hands trembling, he pressed play. Through faint static, her voice came through. Trembling, quiet, but unmistakably hers. I think you need to come out here. For 3 seconds, Jack couldn't breathe. His throat tightened, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then instinct took over. He unbuckled his harness and stood abruptly. Captain? Daniel's voice faltered. Sir, we haven't even started taxi procedures. Jack's voice came out like steel. You have the controls. Maintain hold position. But... Now, Daniel. Jack moved. He didn't slam the cockpit door. He opened it with measured control, but every step he took into the cabin carried the weight of 30 years of aviation authority and 1 second of personal fury. Back in first class, Rebecca was mid-performance, addressing the passengers like a press conference. Atlantic Star Airways prides itself on safety, and while we respect all passengers, compliance is non-negotiable. Her words floated above the cabin, blending with murmurs and the faint ding of phones recording. Winnie sat motionless. She knew that voice, the one that wasn't speaking to her, but about her, as if she were an inconvenience. Her cane vibrated faintly, a discreet alert confirming her connection had gone through. Somewhere ahead of her, Jack would know. She straightened her shoulders and folded her hands. Whatever came next, she would not lose her composure. Kayla whispered to her viewers, "She's so calm. It's almost eerie. Like she knows what's about to happen." The cockpit door opened with a soft click. Passengers turned as the captain stepped into view, tall and composed, his uniform crisp under the cabin lights. Rebecca looked up, startled but relieved. "Captain Loveman, sir. I was just..." Jack's voice cut through her words like wind through glass. "Enough, Miss Turner." Every sound in the cabin stopped. Even the crying baby in row 5 fell silent. Rebecca blinked. "Sir, the passenger is my responsibility now," Jack said evenly. "Step aside." Confused, Rebecca hesitated, glancing toward the passengers, then back to him. "Sir, you don't understand, she's been..." Jack's gaze met hers, steady and unblinking. "I said step aside." The authority in his tone left no room for argument. Rebecca obeyed, retreating toward the galley as whispers rippled through the seats. Winnie's head tilted slightly, listening. She didn't need to see him. She felt him in the shift of the air, in the weight of silence that followed his entrance. "Jack," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. His throat tightened. "I'm here." She smiled faintly. I knew you'd come." The passengers nearest them gasped, recognition dawning in real time. Kayla's live stream exploded with messages. "Wait, that's her husband? The pilot? This is crazy." Rebecca paled, frozen mid-step. "Sir, she's your—" "My wife," Jack said, his voice calm but lethal. The words struck the cabin like lightning. Kayla's phone shook in her hand. "Guys," she whispered breathlessly into the mic, "the blind woman is married to the pilot. This is unbelievable." Within seconds, #Flight 229 and #BlindPassenger trended across social media. Screens lit up around the world. Rebecca stammered, I didn't know, Captain. I didn't." Jack turned on her, his composure stripped to raw fury. "You should have known. You don't lay a hand on any passenger. Not ever. And certainly not on my wife." "Guess," someone whispered. "Oh my God." Rebecca's face drained of color. "Sir, I swear." "Save it," he snapped. "You're relieved of duty." She looked as though the floor had vanished beneath her. Jack turned back to Winnie, his tone softening instantly. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head gently. "Not hurt. Just disappointed." Her words were quiet, but they hit harder than any shout could have. Jack's jaw flexed. "Security's on its way," he said, his voice regaining command. "This flight is grounded until further notice." He lifted his radio. "Ground control, this is Captain Loveman. Confirm holding position. Passenger misconduct, priority report." "Copy that, Captain," came the reply. "Security en route. Do not proceed to taxi." Rebecca slumped into the galley seat, trembling as the cabin filled with murmurs, sympathy, guilt, shame. Kayla ended her live stream with a final whispered line. This flight just became history. Jack crouched beside Winnie, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You should have told me you were on my flight." She smiled weakly. "And spoil the surprise? You always said you wanted to see how your crew performed without bias." His lips pressed into a thin line. "I've seen enough." Her hand found his. "Then make sure they see too." He looked into the faces around him. The passengers, the crew, the bystanders whose silence had allowed cruelty to unfold unchecked. Every one of them looked back with wide, guilty eyes. Jack rose to his full height and spoke to the cabin, his voice a perfect balance of fury and control. "Let this be clear. Discrimination has no place in my command, not against race, not against disability, not against dignity." A hush fell again, not fearful this time, but reverent. Rebecca buried her face in her hands. Outside, airport security approached the aircraft. Inside, hundreds of thousands were already watching the moment unfold online. And though the engines were still, everyone aboard Flight 229 felt it. The shift. A reckoning had begun, and the world was already listening. The air inside the cabin was unnaturally still, a silence too heavy for flight. When the cockpit door opened, even the sound of the hinges seemed to echo. Captain Jack Loveman stepped through the doorway, his uniform immaculate, gold stripes glinting beneath the fluorescent cabin lights. His face was unreadable, not rage, not shock, but something colder, controlled. The quiet was total. Not a cough, not a murmur. Even the faint whir of the air conditioning seemed to hush itself as the captain surveyed his cabin. His eyes moved from the rows of passengers to the galley where Rebecca Turner stood, frozen mid-motion. Her hand was still near her radio, her lips slightly parted as if about to issue another command she now dared not speak. Jack's gaze landed on her. "Miss Turner," he said evenly. His voice carried the calm authority that came from 25 years in the sky, and the weight of something far more personal. Rebecca's throat bobbed. "Captain, sir, I was just about to call for security." The passenger in 2A. The passenger in 2A, Jack interrupted, stepping forward, is my wife. The words detonated like thunder in the pressurized air. Gasps rippled down the aisle. A coffee cup hit the floor. Someone whispered, "His wife?" in disbelief. Another's phone clattered to the ground, still recording. Kayla Shaw, the influencer in row 3, froze with her phone in hand, her live stream trembling as her audience counter skyrocketed. Wait, what? The blind woman is the pilot's wife? This is insane. Keep filming. Rebecca staggered a half-step backward, color draining from her face. Sir, I didn't realize. Jack's tone sharpened. You didn't ask. Her mouth opened, then closed. Captain, with respect, I followed protocol. She refused to comply. You hit her, Jack said flatly. There's no protocol that justifies that. Every word seemed to land heavier than the last. His voice wasn't raised, it didn't have to be. The calm precision of it was worse than shouting. Rebecca's voice cracked. Sir, she was obstructing the aisle. Enough, he cut in, stepping closer. I've reviewed the footage already. Every passenger in this cabin has recorded your behavior. There's no misunderstanding left. Rebecca blinked, confusion giving way to horror. Footage? Jack turned slightly toward the passengers. I suggest you all keep your recordings secure, he said evenly. You've just witnessed a federal offense. Phones lowered in stunned silence. No one dared breathe too loud. Winnie sat quietly in seat 2A, the bruise along her cheek visible beneath her sunglasses. She held her cane in both hands like a scepter, her posture straight, her dignity intact. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and measured. Jack, she murmured, it's all right. He turned to her, the steel in his expression softening instantly. No, it's not. A flicker of warmth and pain passed between them. I told you, Winnie said softly, things aren't always what they look like. He nodded, his throat tight. You were right. Rebecca swallowed hard, her hands trembling at her sides. Captain, I didn't mean. You didn't think, Jack replied. You didn't show humanity. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Around her, even the other flight attendants avoided her gaze. The chain of command was collapsing in real time. Jack tapped his radio, his tone clipped and professional. Ground control, this is Captain Loveman, Flight 229. We have an onboard assault. I'm declaring a misconduct emergency. Doors are to remain sealed until authorities arrive. Copy that, 229, came the reply through the static. Hold position. Security and FAA response inbound. He clicked off the radio and turned back to the stunned cabin crew. Nobody leaves this aircraft, he said, his voice calm but absolute. That's FAA protocol for a federal offense in progress. Rebecca stared at him, disbelief etched across her face. Sir, you're grounding the flight? I'm grounding you, he replied. Guess. Someone in row 4 muttered, Holy hell. Kayla's live stream feed lit up again. Hashtag Flight 229 grounded. Pilot just said she assaulted his wife, on camera. National news incoming. Within seconds, phones began buzzing throughout the cabin. CNN push notifications, Twitter alerts, breaking news banners. Blind passenger struck by flight attendant. Pilot intervenes mid-flight. The story had left the plane before it ever moved. Rebecca's voice faltered, small now. Captain, please? I didn't know she was your wife. Jack's gaze didn't waver. Would that have changed anything? She blinked rapidly, unable to answer. He took one step closer, the authority in his presence unshakable. You didn't strike her because she was my wife. You struck her because you thought she was powerless. Rebecca's lip quivered. I thought she was faking. And now, Jack said coldly, you're realizing how blind you were. A stunned hush spread through the cabin. Even Kayla lowered her phone for a moment, goosebumps rising along her arms. Rebecca's composure shattered completely. Sir, please. I made a mistake. No, Jack said. You made a choice. He turned toward the rest of the cabin. This is the consequence of arrogance disguised as professionalism and prejudice mistaken for procedure. A passenger near the window whispered, He's right. Another nodded, eyes downcast. Jack's gaze softened as it fell on Winnie again. She had not shed a single tear. You okay, Win? He asked quietly. I'm fine, she said. Better than most in this room, I think. Rebecca pressed a hand to her forehead, realizing she was shaking. The youngest flight attendant, a brunette barely in her 20s, stepped forward hesitantly. Captain, should I contact the base? Yes, Jack said. Inform them we've activated emergency hold. And start taking passenger statements. Rebecca tried to interject. That's not. Jack's glare silenced her. You are not to speak again, Miss Turner. The cabin felt suspended between two realities, the structured normalcy of air travel and the raw chaos of human error exposed. Outside, the bright morning sun poured through the oval windows, mocking the darkness unfolding inside. Kayla glanced at her phone screen, 62,000 live viewers. Comments flew faster than she could read. This is history in real time. She kept her dignity, that's power. Pilot's a hero. She zoomed in slightly on Winnie's still figure. The older woman's calmness under public scrutiny was magnetic. Even through the grain of a phone camera, she looked regal. Jack moved toward the front galley, gesturing to the nearest attendant. Lock the forward hatch. No one opens that door without my authorization. The attendant nodded shakily, obeying. Rebecca's knees buckled slightly. Sir, you can't. I can, Jack interrupted, and I will. His tone softened only slightly. You'll stay seated until the FAA arrives. I'll see to it personally that they hear every word you've said today, including calling a blind woman a liar. Rebecca's breathing quickened. I didn't know she was. Stop saying that, Jack snapped, the first true break in his composure. Because that's exactly the point, you didn't care to know. The sentence landed like a verdict. At that moment, a faint ding chimed from multiple devices throughout the plane. News outlets had already picked up Kayla's live stream footage. Every screen, every phone, every social feed displayed the same headline, bold and immediate. Atlantic Star flight incident. Pilot's wife assaulted mid-boarding. Investigation underway. A murmur swept through the passengers as they realized the scale of what they were part of. Some looked ashamed, some vindicated, but all knew the world was now watching. Rebecca sank into a jump seat, head in her hands. Jack returned to Winnie's side. He crouched, resting one hand gently on the armrest near her cane. You sure you're all right? She tilted her head toward his voice, smiling faintly. I'm used to people seeing less than what's there. He swallowed hard. Not anymore. A tear welled at the corner of her eye, but she didn't let it fall. Kayla whispered softly to her viewers, She's incredible. She's not even angry, just composed. Someone commented, That's what real strength looks like. Ground control's voice crackled through Jack's earpiece again. Captain Loveman, confirmed situation secure? He pressed the mic, affirmative. Cabin stable. Awaiting FAA liaison and law enforcement at gate. Copy that. All other traffic advised of delay. Jack exhaled, finally letting the mask of professionalism slip just enough to reveal exhaustion. He sat down beside Winnie, lowering his head briefly into his hands before straightening again. The the captain of the flight sitting beside the blind woman everyone had misjudged, would become one of the most replayed images in aviation history. The minutes stretched. No one dared speak above a whisper. Winnie's fingers brushed her husband's sleeve. "You didn't have to leave the cockpit," she murmured. "I did," he said quietly. "Because the moment I heard your voice, I knew what kind of story this was going to be, and I wasn't going to let someone else write it." Her lips curved in a small, proud smile. Always the pilot, steering through storms. He chuckled softly despite everything. "Always the bravest passenger I know." Rebecca shifted in her seat, whispering to herself, "It wasn't supposed to go like this." The younger attendant glanced over. "What did you expect, Rebecca?" Her eyes lifted, hollow, tear-filled. "A little respect for doing my job." The attendant's voice was steady. "Your job isn't to humiliate people. It's to keep them safe." Rebecca didn't answer. When the first knock came from the jetway, the sound reverberated through the tense cabin. Airport security, FAA officials, corporate representatives. Jack rose, voice firm. "Keep your seats. This cabin remains under command authority until I release it." He opened the door just enough to speak with the incoming officers, his words low and clipped. Then he gestured toward Rebecca. "This is the crew member responsible for passenger assault," he said. "She's to be escorted off immediately." Rebecca stood shakily. "Captain, please." "Not another word," he said. "You've done enough talking for one day." The officers moved forward, their presence quiet but decisive. As they guided Rebecca toward the exit, she turned once toward Winnie. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice breaking. Winnie didn't turn her head. "I hope you mean that," she said softly. As the door closed behind Rebecca, the tension in the cabin finally released like a held breath. Jack addressed the passengers, voice even but weary. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. This flight will not depart today. Atlantic Star Airways will accommodate all passengers on the next available routes. You will each receive direct communication from headquarters." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "You also have my apology and my promise that what happened here will never be ignored or hidden." A few people clapped softly. Others simply nodded. Winnie remained seated, serene amid the murmurs. Kayla ended her stream with a single sentence whispered to her camera. "Compassion just grounded the flight, and the world's watching it happen." Jack turned back to Winnie, offering his arm. "Come on, love. Let's get you home." She rose slowly, leaning on her cane. Her hand found his arm with practiced grace. Together, they walked down the aisle, pilot and passenger, husband and wife, the embodiment of truth standing in the ruins of assumption. No pity, no outrage, just quiet dignity. As they reached the door, she paused and turned slightly toward the cabin, her voice steady but soft enough to command silence. "People see blindness as weakness," she said. "But what's truly blind is judgment without compassion." The plane was silent for a heartbeat, then a low, collective murmur of agreement rippled through the passengers. Outside, cameras flashed through the jetway windows. Inside, a new standard had just been set. The terminal buzzed like a disturbed hive. Gate 47 of Miami International had become the epicenter of a breaking story that no one inside the airport could ignore. Airport security clustered near the jetway, their radios hissing with half-finished reports. Corporate executives in dark suits moved quickly but spoke in whispers, faces pale with disbelief. On the tarmac, Atlantic Star Airways Flight 229 sat motionless. Its nose faced the morning sun, its engines idle, its cabin doors sealed. A plane that was supposed to take off at 7:15 now sat grounded, not by weather or technical failure, but by conscience. Inside, Captain Jack Loveman stood near the cockpit door, the weight of both command and heartbreak heavy on his shoulders. He had filed the initial emergency report minutes earlier, voice steady but clipped. Now, as he waited for the formal response from headquarters, the silence pressed down like altitude. His wife sat quietly in seat 2A, her fingers wrapped around her cane, her posture perfectly straight. Winnie Loveman looked like a statue carved from patience and pride. The red mark on her cheek had faded to a faint blush, but the wound it represented was far deeper, one the cameras couldn't quite capture. The rest of the cabin was a maze of guilt, discomfort, and whispered speculation. Rebecca Turner sat 2 rows behind Winnie, flanked by 2 uniformed airport officers. Her face was ghostly pale, her uniform rumpled, her silver wings askew. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she murmured to herself for the 10th time. "I thought she was faking." The younger flight attendant, Carla, finally snapped, voice low but sharp. "You thought? You didn't ask. That's the problem." Rebecca turned, eyes rimmed red. "I was following procedure." "No, you were following ego," Carla cut in, surprising even herself. Rebecca looked away. Jack's headset crackled with a familiar voice. Mark Hansen, Atlantic Star's head of operations and interim PR officer. His tone carried the strained calm of a man juggling chaos. "Captain Loveman, this is Corporate HQ. We've received your preliminary report and video confirmation. I'm looping you in with PR and FAA liaison on secure video link. Please stand by." Jack exhaled. "Copy that. Cabin secure, passengers stable. Awaiting connection." The flat screen in the forward galley flickered to life, displaying 3 faces: Hansen, PR Director Angela Diaz, and a stone-faced FAA representative. Angela was the first to speak. "Captain Loveman, we're aware of the incident. Before we proceed, we need your full statement on record." Jack nodded, straightening. At approximately 7:04 a.m., flight attendant Rebecca Turner physically assaulted a visually impaired passenger in seat 2A, alleging noncompliance. I intervened after verifying the situation. The passenger in question is my wife, Winnie Loveman. The incident has been captured on multiple passenger devices and streamed live to social media. Angela swallowed hard. "Understood. Is the passenger requiring medical attention?" Winnie's calm voice cut in before Jack could answer. "I'm fine, thank you." Angela blinked at the screen, the voice so composed, so direct, and she found herself momentarily speechless. The FAA officer leaned forward. "Captain, are you maintaining control of the cabin?" Jack nodded. "Yes, sir. Aircraft remains stationary. Doors locked until your team arrives." "Good," the officer said. "You did the right thing by grounding." Rebecca flinched at the word right. In the rows behind, passengers shifted uncomfortably. The entire flight had become a tribunal in the sky. A businessman who had earlier supported Rebecca finally broke the silence. "Captain, I owe your wife an apology," he said, voice unsteady. "I said things before I knew the truth." Winnie turned her head toward his voice. "Thank you," she said softly. "The truth was always here. It just needed someone to look." The man lowered his eyes, shame spreading across his face. A woman in the next row added, "People like her get treated badly all the time. I'm glad someone finally stood up." Someone else muttered, "This whole flight's on TikTok." Kayla, still holding her phone but now subdued, spoke to her camera in a hushed tone. "Guys, you're seeing something historic." The pilot grounded his own plane to protect his wife after she was assaulted. The hashtags already trending. #BlindJustice and #LovemanFlight 229. Her viewer count ticked upward, 80,000, 94,000, 110,000. Even now, She wasn't sure if she was documenting an outrage or a revolution. The video feed from corporate continued. Hansen's voice cracked slightly. "Captain, this footage is going viral globally. News outlets are already running clips. We're drafting a preliminary statement but need to confirm you're willing to speak publicly." Jack hesitated. He was a pilot, not a politician. Every instinct in him screamed for control, for the neutral professionalism he'd practiced for decades. But there was a different voice now, one that came from the man, not the uniform. He glanced at Winnie, who simply nodded once. "Yes," Jack said. "Transparency matters more than damage control." Angela looked uneasy. "That's commendable, Captain, but legal will advise." "Legal can wait," Jack interrupted. "The world's already watching. If we pretend this didn't happen, we're no better than the silence that caused it." The FA officer exhaled through his nose, not approval, but reluctant respect. "Captain," he said quietly, "you understand this breaks multiple procedural lines." Jack's voice didn't waver. "Then I'll take responsibility for that." Winnie smiled faintly. "That's my husband." The camera feed flickered again as another face joined, Atlantic Star's CEO, Douglas Reeves, a man who looked more like a politician than an executive. "Jack," he began smoothly, "I've been briefed. You've put the company in a difficult position." Jack's jaw tightened. "No, sir. Rebecca Turner put the company in this position. I'm just refusing to cover it up." Reeves frowned. "You've created a media firestorm." "Good," Jack said. "Maybe it'll light the way." There was a pause, long, brittle. Then, to everyone's surprise, Reeves sighed. "You've always been one of our best captains, Jack. Handle this with integrity, and I'll support you. But I need an immediate written report." "It'll be done," Jack said curtly. "Rebecca Turner," Reeves added, shifting tone. "You're suspended effective immediately. You'll remain under FAA investigation. Do not speak to the press." Rebecca stared at the screen, pale as paper. "Yes, sir." Down the aisle, Kayla turned her phone toward herself. "Guys, you just heard it live. The flight attendant's been suspended. The CEO himself confirmed it." Her voice trembled. "This is bigger than just one flight now." Her comments section flooded with praise for Winnie's composure and Jack's courage. "The Lovemans are heroes." #blind justice worldwide. "Dignity always wins." The feed from headquarters disconnected, leaving the cabin in near silence. Jack sat across from his wife, removing his captain's hat and setting it gently on his knee. The room seemed to breathe again, the adrenaline fading into fatigue. "You okay, Win?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I'm now. But this isn't just about me." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "It's about everyone who's ever been dismissed." Her hand found his. "And everyone who's ever stayed silent." The words lingered in the stillness. As ground crews moved outside, Kayla approached slowly, her phone lowered out of respect. "Mrs. Loveman, may I ask you something? Off camera?" Winnie smiled gently. "Of course." Kayla hesitated. "How do you stay so calm after all this?" Winnie tilted her head, her clouded eyes seeming to look through her. "Because anger gives them control," she said softly. "But dignity? Dignity reminds them what they lost." Kayla's eyes shimmered. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, reluctantly, she turned her camera back on. "To everyone watching," she said quietly, "remember what she just said? Dignity over anger. That's the lesson today." Her feed exploded with comments. "Goosebumps. Someone put that quote on a billboard." #Wings of Compassion. At the front of the plane, Jack composed his formal statement over the radio. His voice was calm but resolute. "This is Captain Loveman, commanding officer of Flight 229. At 7:04, a violation of federal aviation conduct occurred involving physical assault and verbal discrimination against a disabled passenger. The aircraft has been grounded pending investigation. Passenger and crew safety remain stable. Captain assumes full command accountability. End of report. When he released the transmit button, the silence that followed was different now, not heavy, but purposeful. Carla exhaled shakily. "You just made history, sir." Jack gave a tired smile. History usually starts with someone refusing to look away. Outside, reporters had already gathered. Cameras lined the terminal windows, flashes reflecting off the fuselage. Within 30 minutes, international networks carried the story. Pilot grounds own flight after wife, a blind passenger, assaulted by crew. #Blind Justice and #Loveman Flight 229 trend across platforms. Inside, the cabin had transformed from outrage to introspection. Passengers spoke quietly now. A mother whispered to her teenage son, "Remember this. This is what integrity looks like." An elderly man in row 6 tapped his heart. "That woman's grace. I'll never forget it." Even Rebecca, seated under quiet guard, whispered a broken sentence. "I didn't know what I was doing." Winnie turned her head slightly. "That's the point, dear. You didn't see." Rebecca looked away, tears slipping silently down her face. Jack's phone buzzed, a message from headquarters. "Hold position. FAA and law enforcement boarding in 10 minutes. He nodded to the officers. "We'll cooperate fully." Then he turned to Winnie once more, voice gentler now. "They'll take statements soon. Are you ready for that?" "I've been ready my whole life," she said quietly. "People have been telling stories about me for years. It's time they finally hear mine." Jack smiled, proud and sad all at once. As the first federal officers entered the cabin, the cameras of the world were already waiting. Jack stood, hat in hand, greeting them formally. "Captain Jack Loveman, commanding officer. Aircraft secured." One of the officers nodded respectfully. "We saw the footage, Captain. You did the right thing." Jack simply said, "So did she." He gestured toward Winnie. The officer paused, offering her a nod. "Ma'am, thank you for your composure." She smiled faintly. "Thank you for finally seeing me." As Winnie was escorted gently toward the exit, Kayla captured one final clip, not live, just for her personal archive. The blind woman's figure, walking arm in arm with her husband down the aisle of a silent plane, was a portrait of strength that needed no caption. When they reached the open cabin door, Jack paused and looked back at the passengers. His voice carried softly through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "this flight may not have taken off, but I promise you, it's going to go somewhere far more important." Applause broke out. Quiet at first, then building, heartfelt. Winnie smiled and whispered, "That's your pilot voice again." Jack squeezed her hand. "That's my wife you're hearing." And together, under the blinding lights of justice and redemption, they stepped off Flight 229, leaving behind the cabin that would become a global symbol of accountability and grace. The conference room at Atlantic Star headquarters had never felt so small. Normally, it was a space of polished professionalism, glass walls, chrome fixtures, panoramic views of the Miami skyline. But this morning, the atmosphere was suffocating. Every person in the room carried the weight of the same question. How did this happen on our watch? The faces around the table were tense: corporate executives, FAA officials, legal advisors, and union representatives, each trying to control a story that was already beyond anyone's control. A large monitor at the head of the table displayed a live video feed from the grounded Flight 229, still sitting motionless on the tarmac. Captain Jack Loveman appeared on screen, his uniform immaculate, expression stern. Beside him sat his wife, Winnie Loveman, her sunglasses perched neatly on the bridge of her nose, her cane resting upright beside her. Her posture was calm, regal even, but the quiet in her face spoke of exhaustion and grace hard-earned. At the far end of the table in Miami HQ sat Mark Hansen, Atlantic Star's chief legal officer, his fingers steepled as he leaned toward the microphone. "Captain Loveman, Mrs. Loveman, thank you for your patience. We understand this has been a traumatic incident, and we intend to handle it with transparency and accountability." Jack gave a curt nod. "Transparency's all we ask, Mr. Hansen." Hansen hesitated. "Understood. Let's begin formally. This session is being recorded under FAA supervision. For the record, this is the initial investigation into Flight 229's cabin misconduct involving a crew member, Rebecca Turner." The FAA liaison, a tall woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, adjusted her headset. "Captain Loveman, the Federal Aviation Administration has reviewed the preliminary incident footage. We will require full access to the aircraft, including the flight data and crew communication logs." Jack nodded. "Granted. The aircraft is under full lockdown per my order." The liaison scribbled a note, then looked toward the second screen, where Rebecca Turner appeared from a smaller holding room at Miami International. Her posture was stiff, eyes rimmed red, uniform jacket removed. A union representative sat beside her, whispering quietly. Hansen's voice was firm. "Miss Turner, you are appearing today as the primary subject of this inquiry. You've been suspended from all active flight duty pending investigation." Rebecca swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. Do you acknowledge that the incident occurred aboard Flight 229 under your supervision?" Her voice trembled. I do." "And that physical contact was made with a passenger?" "Yes, but—" "No qualifiers," Hansen cut in smoothly. "You admit to striking a passenger?" Rebecca's eyes darted down. "Yes." Hansen paused, letting the silence stretch long enough for the weight of her confession to land. "Now," he said, "would you like to explain why?" Rebecca's voice cracked. "I thought she was faking. I thought she was trying to cause trouble. She walked into the cart, knocked over coffee and—" Jack's eyes hardened. "And that justified hitting her?" Rebecca's composure wavered. "I panicked, okay? The flight was delayed, and she wasn't cooperating. I was under pressure." "Pressure doesn't excuse prejudice," Jack said quietly. The FAA liaison leaned forward. "Miss Turner, are you aware that under federal aviation law, physical assault of a passenger, regardless of context, is a criminal offense?" Rebecca's chin quivered. "Yes." Hansen made a note. "You'll receive legal counsel, Miss Turner. But for now, your employment is suspended indefinitely, pending FAA review." The union representative beside her spoke up sharply. "Let's be clear, my client's actions, though unacceptable, were not premeditated. She's entitled to due process." Hansen's gaze flicked toward him. "No one here is denying due process. But intent doesn't erase impact. The world saw what happened." Rebecca flinched at the phrase "the world saw." The screen shifted to a live replay of the viral video, raw, unedited. The room dimmed automatically as the lights adjusted for playback. On screen, the moment unfolded. Winnie, cane in hand, walking carefully down the aisle. The faint rattle of a tray. The startled voice of Rebecca Turner. Then the slap, sharp, unmistakable, echoing through the first-class cabin. Gasps filled the real conference room as they filled the one in the video. Even those who had already seen it couldn't look away. Rebecca's recorded voice sneered from the speakers, "Maybe open your eyes and find it." In the footage, Winnie's calm reply followed like a blade of truth. "I can't see, miss. That's why I asked for help." The silence that followed the playback was absolute. Angela Diaz, the PR director, pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "Oh God," she whispered. "It's worse than I thought." Hansen muted the video, his voice measured but icy. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a PR crisis. This is a cultural one." Winnie spoke softly into the microphone. "I only asked for a little help finding my seat." The simplicity of the statement hung in the air like a verdict. The FAA liaison blinked, visibly moved. "Mrs. Loveman, thank you for your statement. We apologize that you were treated this way aboard a U.S. commercial aircraft." Winnie inclined her head slightly. "Apologies can't undo a hand raised in anger. But they can stop the next one." Jack reached for her hand, squeezing it gently under the table. Hansen turned back to the screen showing Rebecca. "Miss Turner, do you have anything to say to Mrs. Loveman?" Rebecca's voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I was wrong." Winnie tilted her head toward the sound, her voice soft but steady. "I hope one day you mean that." Rebecca's face crumpled. The union rep whispered something to her, but it didn't matter. The cameras had captured truth, and no contract clause could rewrite it. The conversation shifted. Hansen addressed the FAA liaison. "Given the nature of the incident, what are your immediate recommendations?" She glanced at her notes. "The aircraft will remain grounded as a controlled scene. We'll collect flight logs, security footage, and passenger statements. Additionally, I'll recommend a full review of Atlantic Star's disability and bias training programs." Jack nodded. "I'll provide my full report within the hour." Hansen added, "Captain Loveman, your professionalism during the event has been noted by federal authorities. But we also understand the emotional conflict." Jack's jaw flexed. "There's no conflict between duty and decency." The FAA liaison gave a small, approving nod. Outside, news coverage of the incident had already saturated every network. Screens around the airport flashed images of Winnie's poised face, Jack's composed statement, and the viral hashtags. #BlindJustice, #LovemanFlight229, #DignityInTheSky. The world had found its symbols, and its reckoning. Inside the conference room, Hansen cleared his throat. "Captain, Mrs. Loveman, one final question, and I ask this respectfully. Why didn't you disclose that you were married prior to boarding?" Winnie smiled faintly. "Because I wasn't there as a captain's wife. I was there as a passenger, one who deserved the same respect as anyone else." Jack added quietly, "And because I never wanted my crew to treat her differently. Ironically, that's exactly what happened." Hansen sighed. "It's ironic indeed." The FAA liaison tapped her pen thoughtfully. "If anything, this reveals the blind spots we've all ignored, no pun intended." Winnie's lips twitched in the faintest smile. "Sometimes, you have to lose sight to finally see." The legal formality continued for another hour, statements, confirmations, procedural notes, but beneath the bureaucracy was a pulse of something deeper, change. Rebecca's feed flickered off once her suspension was finalized. She was escorted out by airport security, leaving behind the uniform that had once defined her identity. Hansen exhaled heavily. "We'll issue a formal statement within the hour. Captain Loveman, Mrs. Loveman, the board would like to commend your integrity and restraint under unimaginable circumstances." Jack gave a small nod. "Restraint comes easy when the alternative is injustice." Angela, still visibly shaken, leaned forward. "Mrs. Loveman, if you're comfortable, the company would like to offer you the chance to help us rebuild our policy framework. To make sure this never happens again." Winnie tilted her head, considering. "I don't want a role. I want reform." Angela smiled faintly. "Then help us make that happen." When the call ended, Jack and Winnie sat in the quiet cabin of the now empty aircraft. The crew had been dismissed. The passengers had disembarked. Outside, the faint hum of maintenance vehicles filled the void. Jack leaned back in his seat, rubbing his temples. "I've flown through hurricanes calmer than that meeting." Winnie chuckled softly. "And I've survived storms meaner than that slap." He smiled at her, the kind of smile that carried 25 years of love, struggle, and shared resilience. "You always did have more grace than the rest of us," he said. She turned her face toward him, eyes unseeing but presence unmistakable. "Grace doesn't mean you don't feel pain, Jack. It just means you don't let it own you." He reached over, brushing his thumb gently against her cheek where the faint mark still lingered. "No one will ever do this to you again." Her hand found his, squeezing lightly. "You can't promise that, but you can promise to make sure it matters." He nodded. "That I can do." Outside the cabin windows, the afternoon light glinted off the metallic skin of the plane, a reflection of stillness after chaos. Inside, the sound of their quiet conversation filled the empty air, two voices carrying both love and legacy. Jack broke the silence. "Do you remember the first time we met?" She smiled, the memory blooming across her face. "You tripped over my guide dog in the terminal." He laughed. "You scolded me before you even told me your name." "You deserved it," she teased. "You were too sure of yourself back then." He leaned closer, voice softer. "And you weren't." Her lips curved. "I was blind, not foolish." Their laughter, quiet, weary, but genuine, carried through the cabin like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Minutes later, an FAA officer entered to confirm the aircraft's seizure for evidence. "Captain Mrs. Loveman," he said politely, "will be holding Flight 229 for full inspection. We appreciate your cooperation." Jack rose, shaking his hand. "Whatever you need." The officer hesitated, then added sincerely, "Ma'am, I hope you know what you did today changed things." Winnie smiled gently. "Change starts small, officer, but it grows when people care enough to look." He nodded, clearly moved. As they walked down the jet bridge together, arm in arm, Jack glanced toward the sea of reporters and cameras waiting beyond the terminal doors. "You ready for this?" he asked. She tightened her grip on his arm. "I was born ready, Captain." He smiled, voice low. "That's my girl." And as the doors opened to the flashing lights of the world beyond, the pilot and the blind woman, husband and wife, survivors and reformers, stepped forward into the glare of history, side by side. Their flight hadn't taken off that day, but their story had just begun its ascent. By sunrise the next day, the incident aboard Atlantic Star Flight 229 had become the most watched video in the world. 20 million views. 500,000 comments, and a conversation that refused to be silenced. News anchors dissected every second of the footage, pausing on the moment of impact, the slap that had set off a movement. Across networks, panels of experts debated what it all meant. CNN asked, "Is this the reckoning the airline industry has been avoiding?" BBC called it a defining moment for disability rights in modern aviation. On Twitter, the phrase #BlindJustice trended for the second day in a row. Clips of Winnie Loveman's calm dignity looped endlessly, the quiet strength in her voice, the stillness in her posture, the way she refused to raise her voice even when humiliated. To millions, she had become something more than a victim. She was a symbol. Outside Atlantic Star headquarters in Miami, hundreds of protesters gathered beneath the company's sleek glass facade. Their signs read, "Dignity flies first. No excuse for abuse. We are all Winnie Loveman." Reporters swarmed the entrance, their cameras aimed at every executive who dared step outside. The air crackled with anger and hope in equal measure. Chants rose from the crowd, rhythmic, united, undeniable. "Justice for Winnie! reform the skies. Security struggled to contain the sea of people. Airport employees, travelers, and advocates for the disabled stood shoulder to shoulder, their voices echoing off glass and concrete. For once, the story wasn't about profit, procedure, or public relations. It was about humanity. In a quiet hotel suite overlooking Biscayne Bay, Jack Loveman sat on the edge of the bed, uniform jacket folded neatly beside him. He stared at his pilot's cap, the same cap he'd worn proudly for 25 years, and made a decision. He picked up his phone and called the Atlantic Star operations line. "This is Captain Jack Loveman," he said evenly. "Effective immediately, I'm grounding myself." The operator hesitated. "Sir, the investigation hasn't found you at fault." "I'm not asking permission," Jack interrupted. "I'm saying I won't fly again until this company proves it can protect the people it serves, including passengers like my wife." He ended the call, exhaling slowly. The silence that followed was both heavy and freeing. Winnie, sitting by the window with her cane across her lap, turned her head toward him. "You're stepping down?" He nodded, though she couldn't see it. "For now. The system needs to change, Win. And maybe it starts with me." She smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure your silence means something." By noon, Atlantic Star's CEO, Margaret Ellis, appeared before a swarm of reporters at a hastily assembled press conference. The company logo glowed behind her on a giant screen, though it felt less like branding and more like a backdrop for contrition. "Yesterday," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "a passenger aboard one of our flights experienced an inexcusable act of discrimination and physical assault. That passenger was Mrs. Winnie Loveman. The pilot on duty was her husband, Captain Jack Loveman, a man who has served this airline with honor for more than 2 decades. The flash of cameras filled the silence. Ellis took a breath, steadying herself. Atlantic Star Airways is instituting immediate reforms. Effective today, we are launching the Vision of Dignity program, a complete overhaul of our training, culture, and accountability systems. Every employee, from executives to ground crew, will undergo mandatory education on disability awareness, bias response, and passenger protection. We will partner with advocacy organizations to ensure lasting change." A journalist called out, "Is the flight attendant, Rebecca Turner, still employed by Atlantic Star?" Ellis's tone sharpened. "Ms. Turner has been terminated. Additionally, she faces criminal charges under federal aviation law for assaulting a passenger with a disability." The room erupted in questions, legal, ethical, emotional, but Ellis raised a hand for silence. "This is not just about one employee," she said firmly. "It's about a culture that allowed indifference to become normalized. That ends today." The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was raw, a collective release of breath from people who had been waiting for accountability. That afternoon, the Department of Transportation released a statement confirming that Rebecca Turner had been formally charged with assault on a protected passenger under federal aviation law. She was taken into custody pending arraignment, her image flashing across screens once more, not as a symbol of authority, but as a warning of what unchecked prejudice could become. Meanwhile, Winnie's face appeared everywhere. Her quote from the day before, "calm and resolute," had already become iconic. People see blindness as weakness, but what's truly blind is judgment without compassion. It appeared on banners, news tickers, social media bios, and even handmade signs carried by protesters across the country. In the quiet of their suite, away from the noise of the world, Winnie sat surrounded by stacks of letters and emails that had begun pouring in, thousands of them. Jack entered with 2 more boxes from the front desk. "Another delivery," he said softly. She smiled, running her fingers across one of the envelopes. "From where?" "London, Toronto, Nairobi, Melbourne. Seems the world's handwriting looks the same when it's trying to say thank you. She reached for a letter and handed it to him. Read me one. He unfolded the paper. Dear Mrs. Loveman, I'm a visually impaired college student studying to be a lawyer. When I saw what happened to you, I cried, not because it was cruel, but because you didn't let it destroy your grace. You gave me the courage to travel again. Thank you for reminding us that our worth doesn't depend on sight, but on how we choose to see the world. Ramirez, New York. Jack's voice caught slightly as he finished reading. They're writing to you, Win. You're changing lives. She smiled, her fingers tracing the braille on another letter. Notice, we're changing them. Together. Later that evening, the two of them sat on the hotel balcony as the city lights shimmered across the bay. You know, Jack said quietly, for years I thought my job was about keeping people safe in the air. But maybe it's really about keeping them seen. Winnie tilted her head toward him. And maybe mine is about helping them see what's been invisible all along. He took her hand gently, their fingers intertwining. So, he asked, what happens now? The airline will fix its policies, the media will move on, what about us? She turned her face toward the sound of the waves. Then we make sure this isn't just a story people remember, it's a movement they join. Jack nodded slowly. You're thinking bigger than reform. I'm thinking transformation, she said softly. A foundation, something that outlives outrage. He smiled. Wings of compassion. She paused, then nodded. That's what we'll call it. And in that moment, the chaos of the last 48 hours began to take on a different kind of flight, not one powered by engines, but by purpose. Outside, the protests continued. Inside, the Lovemans began to dream. Not of vengeance, not of vindication, but of a world where no passenger, no matter their color or their condition, would ever again have to beg for dignity at 30,000 feet. Their story had started in humiliation, a slap that was meant to silence. But from that silence, they had built something louder than anger and stronger than hate. Change. And it was only just beginning. The federal hearing took place on a crisp spring morning in Washington, D.C., just 6 weeks after the incident that had gripped the world. Outside the courthouse, journalists and advocates filled the marble steps, holding banners that read, "Justice takes flight." The Loveman standards now. Dignity has no class section. The case had transcended aviation. It had become a national mirror, forcing America to confront how easily prejudice could disguise itself as procedure. Inside, cameras lined the back of the hearing room. Every major network streamed the proceedings live. Millions tuned in from across the world, not just to see the outcome, but to hear from the woman whose quiet grace had changed how people thought about strength. At the center of it all sat Winnie Loveman, calm and composed in a navy dress. Her cane rested against the table beside her, her posture upright, her face serene. Beside her was Captain Jack Loveman, his uniform jacket neatly pressed, his hands folded. Across from them sat Rebecca Turner, eyes swollen, face pale, her composure long gone. The air buzzed with tension. The presiding judge, Honorable Ruth Lanning, adjusted her glasses. This hearing is convened under federal aviation jurisdiction to determine charges related to the physical assault and discrimination of a passenger with a disability aboard Atlantic Star Airways Flight 229. Ms. Turner, you may proceed with your statement. Rebecca swallowed, her voice breaking. Your Honor, I want to say, first and foremost, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I didn't realize. Her voice faltered, and she wiped her tears with a trembling hand. I thought she was lying. I thought she wanted attention. The flight was delayed. I lost my temper. The judge's gaze was sharp. You were entrusted with passenger safety, Miss Turner. You lost more than your temper. You lost your humanity. Rebecca began to sob openly. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know her husband was the pilot. Even if she weren't, the judge interrupted, would that make the assault acceptable? The courtroom fell silent except for Rebecca's quiet crying. Jack's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm when he finally spoke. Your Honor, may I address the court? The judge nodded. Jack stood, every inch the composed captain, but his eyes betrayed fatigue, the weight of a man who had held the line between duty and love. I've spent my life making sure people feel safe 30,000 feet above the ground, he said. But that day, my wife, a woman who has never once asked for special treatment, wasn't safe 10 feet from the boarding door. My uniform represents trust. And when a member of my crew used that uniform to harm instead of help, she didn't just betray my wife. She betrayed the promise we make to every passenger who steps aboard. He paused, his voice steady but thick with emotion. This was never about status. It's about decency. And decency shouldn't require a scandal to be enforced. A hush fell over the courtroom. Even Rebecca, tear-streaked, looked at him with remorse. Then, the prosecutor stood. Your Honor, the prosecution would like to enter into evidence an audio log from Flight 229's cabin communications. The judge nodded. Proceed. The playback began, the faint crackle of the intercom, the shuffle of movement, and then Rebecca's voice. Maybe open your eyes and find it. People fake disabilities all the time. If she can't follow instructions, maybe she shouldn't be flying. The words, cold and cutting, echoed through the chamber. When the recording stopped, the silence that followed was devastating. No one looked at Rebecca. Her face collapsed into her hands. The judge turned toward Winnie. Mrs. Loveman, would you like to make a statement before the verdict? All eyes turned to her. Cameras zoomed in. The world seemed to hold its breath. Winnie stood slowly, her cane steady in her hand. Her voice was calm, quiet, but carried the kind of power that could still a crowd of thousands. People see blindness as weakness, she began, but what's truly blind is judgment without compassion. The words landed like a revelation, soft yet unshakable. She continued, that day, I wasn't just struck by a hand. I was struck by a mindset, one that sees difference as inconvenience. I didn't want revenge. I wanted reflection. Because if one person can be humiliated in plain sight, then all of us have gone blind to what kindness means. Her voice wavered slightly, but she steadied herself. I forgive Miss Turner. But forgiveness isn't freedom from accountability. It's the first step toward change. When she sat back down, even the reporters were silent. For the first time in days, the cameras didn't feel intrusive, they felt reverent. The judge leaned forward. This court finds the defendant, Rebecca Turner, guilty of assault under federal aviation law and violation of passenger protection statutes. Rebecca sobbed openly. The judge continued, you are hereby sentenced to 12 months of probation, mandatory community service in disability support programs, and permanent revocation of your flight certification. The gavel struck once, the sound of finality. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in applause as word spread. Winnie and Jack stepped onto the courthouse steps, hand in hand, as flashes of cameras illuminated their faces. Journalists shouted questions, but Winnie only smiled faintly, tilting her head toward the sound of their voices. We didn't come for punishment, she said softly. We came for progress. Her line made headlines within minutes. But the quote that truly ignited hearts was the one she had spoken inside the courtroom. People see blindness as weakness, but what's truly blind is judgment without compassion. It trended globally again, this time not as outrage, but as a movement, printed on posters, quoted by politicians, etched into murals across airports worldwide. Hashtag blind justice became hashtag the Loveman standards, a term coined by advocates and soon formalized by the FAA itself. 2 weeks later, the Federal Aviation Administration announced sweeping new regulations inspired by the Loveman case. The Loveman standards would require mandatory empathy and accessibility training for all flight crews, a new federal passenger bill of rights for disabled travelers, real-time accountability systems for in-flight misconduct. It was the most comprehensive reform to passenger protection in 50 years. At the same time, Atlantic Star Airways released a statement pledging $10 million toward global disability inclusion initiatives and announcing Winnie Loveman as the official advisor to their new Vision of Dignity program. That evening, the Lovemans returned home to their modest Miami townhouse. The sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the walls in amber light. Jack placed his cap on the mantel beside Winnie's cane, two symbols of strength, side by side. "You did it," he whispered. She smiled. "No, we did it. But the work's just begun." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You know," he said softly, "I think your words today will outlive both of us." "Maybe," she replied with a grin. "But if they do, I hope they remind people that sight isn't the same as vision." He chuckled quietly. "Always the poet." "And you," she teased, "always the pilot." They stood there for a long while, silent except for the hum of evening traffic and the distant sound of the ocean breeze. Two people who had weathered the storm, now standing at the calm center of what they'd created. For the world, their story had become a headline, a hashtag, a law. But for Jack and Winnie Loveman, it was something simpler. A promise kept between two souls who refused to let cruelty define the flight path of their lives. A year had passed since the day the skies stood still. Atlantic Star Airways was almost unrecognizable now, not just in color or logo, but in spirit. The company had undergone a full rebrand, trading its glossy image for something deeper, accountability. Every flight began the same way now. Before takeoff, passengers watched a short onboard video featuring a calm voice and soft piano music. At Atlantic Star, we believe accessibility isn't accommodation, it's dignity. We fly with compassion, and we land with equality. Images of diverse passengers filled the screen. A man in a wheelchair boarding with ease, a mother signing to her deaf child, and, finally, a familiar figure, Winnie Loveman, smiling gently as she adjusted her white cane. "I may not see where I'm going," her recorded voice said, "but I trust that I'll arrive with respect." The cabin always erupted in quiet applause when the video ended. Flight attendants straightened their posture, aware that they weren't just enforcing rules anymore. They were embodying a standard. The Loveman standard. In the year since the incident, airline discrimination complaints had dropped by nearly 70% across North America. Other carriers had followed Atlantic Star's lead, adopting new accessibility programs inspired by the Loveman's advocacy. At the heart of it all was Wings of Compassion, the nonprofit foundation Jack and Winnie had founded together. Operating out of a small but bustling office in downtown Miami, the organization provided travel assistance to blind and disabled passengers, free escort services, legal support for discrimination cases, and education programs for airlines worldwide. Its motto was simple: see with heart, fly with dignity. And it worked. Letters poured in from travelers who had once been afraid to board planes. Now, they shared stories of attendants who offered help without pity, of captains who checked on passengers personally, of airlines that had learned to see the humanity behind every boarding pass. Inside a bright classroom at Atlantic Star's new flight academy, a group of trainee attendants sat in rapt silence as Winnie Loveman stood at the front of the room. Her dark sunglasses caught the overhead light as she leaned gently on her cane. Her smile carried warmth, but her presence carried authority. People ask me all the time, she said softly, what it felt like that day on Flight 229. And I tell them, it felt like the world had stopped seeing me. The room was silent. But here's the truth, she continued. That day also showed me something beautiful, that one moment of cruelty can be transformed by courage. That one act of disrespect can awaken an entire industry. And that compassion, she paused, tapping her cane lightly against the floor, can travel farther than any airplane ever could. A young trainee in the front row raised her hand timidly. Mrs. Loveman, do you ever feel afraid to fly now? Winnie smiled. Afraid? I feel hopeful. Because I know people like you are up there now, eyes open, hearts open. Applause filled the classroom. Some of the trainees wiped their eyes. Winnie's presence didn't just teach policy, it restored purpose. As the session ended, one of the instructors stepped forward. Mrs. Loveman, on behalf of all of us, thank you for giving our wings meaning again. Winnie inclined her head. Thank you for proving that kindness can be standard practice. That evening, the world watched as the Global Aviation Summit convened in New York City, the largest international gathering of airline leaders in history. Reporters filled the auditorium as Captain Jack Loveman, now Director of Flight Safety for Atlantic Star, took the stage. His uniform gleamed under the lights, his voice calm and resonant. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, a year ago, I stood in a cabin where silence spoke louder than any intercom. Today, I stand before you not as a pilot, but as a husband, grateful for the woman who taught the world that dignity isn't a policy, it's a principle. He gestured toward the side of the stage. Please welcome the reason we're all here, Mrs. Winnie Loveman. The audience rose in a standing ovation even before she reached the podium. The spotlight followed her as she crossed the stage, her cane tapping rhythmically against the floor, steady, unhurried, commanding. When she reached the microphone, the room fell utterly silent. Her voice was gentle but sure. When I boarded that plane a year ago, I didn't expect to make history. I just wanted to get to my destination safely. But life has a way of turning turbulence into transformation. A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. I may have lost my sight, she said, pausing as the room leaned closer, but that day, the world saw what justice looks like when love refuses to stay quiet. Applause thundered through the hall. Cameras flashed like lightning, but Winnie didn't flinch. She stood still, grounded in grace, her words echoing long after the sound faded. Behind her, a massive screen projected the new global campaign logo, the Loveman Standard, Humanity at 30,000 feet. Later, as the summit concluded, Jack guided Winnie down the aisle of a waiting aircraft, this one brand new, painted in Atlantic Star's new teal and gold colors. A young attendant greeted them at the door. Welcome aboard, Mrs. Loveman, she said softly. May I guide you to your seat? Winnie smiled. Thank you, but I can manage. She lifted her cane, tapped the floor once, and walked confidently down the aisle, unaided, unhurried, unafraid. Passengers turned to watch, not with pity, but with admiration. Some even applauded quietly. At the front of the cabin, Jack took his familiar place in the cockpit. Before closing the door, he looked back at her, and she smiled, tilting her head slightly toward the sound of his footsteps. It was the same journey, but a different world. As the plane prepared for takeoff, the onboard announcement began to play, the same voice the world now knew so well. At Atlantic Star, we don't just fly passengers. We carry stories, hopes, and humanity. Thank you for choosing to see the world through compassion. Winnie settled into her seat, her hands folded over her cane. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, familiar, comforting, alive. Outside, the runway lights stretched into the horizon like threads of gold. And as the aircraft lifted into the open sky, Winnie whispered to herself. Now that's how you rise. Curtain closes on applause, cameras flashing. A symbol of strength through dignity.
Thank you so much for watching till the very end of this powerful story. What an incredible journey it's been, from heartbreak and humiliation to strength, justice, and redemption. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's that dignity is not something you earn, it's something you're born with. And no amount of prejudice, ignorance, or power can take that away. Winnie Loveman showed the world that grace under fire can shake entire systems and turn cruelty into lasting change. Let her story remind us that true vision doesn't come from the eyes, it comes from the heart. If you were moved by this story, please support the channel by subscribing, liking this video, and sharing it with your friends and loved ones. Your engagement helps us keep bringing real, inspiring stories like this one to life. Stories that open minds, touch hearts, and remind us what humanity looks like at its best. And don't go anywhere just yet. We'll be back tomorrow with another powerful story you won't want to miss. In the meantime, go ahead and click on the previous video showing on your screen right now. Trust me, it's another unforgettable tale about truth, courage, and the strength that lives in all of us. Thank you for being part of Tales of an Observer, where every story reminds us that compassion still has wings.